Thanks for tuning in to the Marvel Movie Minute.
Want to skip those pesky ads and get early access?
Become a member at truestory.fm/join and discover all the other great perks that come with it.
Welcome back to the Marvel Movie Minute, a weekly podcast which we assemble to explore the films of the Marvel Cinematic Universe 5 minutes at a time. In this, our 8th season, we're looking at Thor: The Dark World. I'm Matthew Fox.
I'm Pete Wright, and that intro was as long as the first hour of the new Mission Impossible movie.
That sounds about right. And today we're not talking about Mission Impossible. We are talking about the impossible mission of trying to find good things to say about Thor: The Dark World, which turns out is not impossible, because I'm going to say something good about the technical aspects of this movie this week. Yes, folks, it is happening here live on stream. We might edit it out, so if you're watching live on stream, particularly, like, this is a good reason to come watch it live on stream, because you never know what's going to happen. But for those following at home with the actual minute part of the Minute by Minute podcast, today we're talking about minutes 26, 27, 28, 29, and 30, which begins with Jane seeing the world with ether-colored glasses and ends with her being the annoying patient to some Asgardian nurses.
So I was unclear, because in that note, you just changed it. You said she was the annoying patient, but in your notes, you called the Asgardian nurses annoying. Who is annoying, Matthew?
Okay, so what I wrote was with her annoying Asgardian nurses.
That she was being annoying to them.
Right. It ends with her annoying Asgardian nurses.
So no disrespect to Asgardian nurses.
Right.
In this sequence. They work hard.
I think we went to schools in different places. Mine, we learned grammar. So yeah, grammatically, that's how this particular sentence works.
Stop.
But anyway, yes. So, and in the midst of this, she has a moment with Darcy. Apparently, the police in Great Britain really care about trespassing in ways that are somewhat unique. But they almost get arrested. Thor comes to rescue her. She slaps Thor across the face. She has this very romantic rom-com moment where they don't really understand each other, but it's played for laughs. And then Darcy interrupts them. And then she gets to go to Heimdall. And then she gets the nurses. And there we go. Let's go have some food.
Oh, okay. That's the end of the everything. So this is a sort of a utility minute. It needs to move some characters forward. I don't have a deep need to further litigate the wonkiness of the Aether.
Yep.
I think we did that in the last 2 episodes. I think we've been to town on that. I do have some things to say, but I'll tell you, I don't know if I can say them and be patient while I wait for you to say something nice.
Well, so why don't you get the nice thing out of the way then? Because
please, let's just flush that out of our system.
I've heard this concept of show don't tell, that once or twice, that maybe that's a better thing. I think for the most part, this director disagrees. And everything about the Ether,
MCU disagrees, Matthew.
Well, often. There is subtlety sometimes.
Yeah.
But in this minute, like, we get all of that weird Aether stuff 5 minutes ago that you heard me talk about. And frankly, I think you could have cut all of that out and just done the neat thing that happens here, which is that she opens her eyes. And she has, as I described, like ether-colored lenses. There's no red tint, but definitely it feels like there's something weird in her vision, and she's having to sort of like slowly come back to herself. And then in what is a fairly subtly done moment, amazingly, because it's never lampshaded, she walks out into the rain after Darcy comes to get her, and the rain is not falling on her or Darcy. And it's just something you get to notice of realities being reshaped around her in this particular way. Why is the ether afraid of the rain? Well, that's a whole other story. I don't know. But it not only does it not hit her, but then when Thor shows up and she goes over to talk to Thor, we get this great moment of Darcy being left behind and the rain kind of coming back into the space that Jane used to occupy. And all of a sudden it's falling on Darcy and she's unhappy about that. And I was just like, I feel like you tried this subtlety thing because you lost a bet because it was so not what you did the rest of the movie. or the director tried it, went, no, that felt wrong. We didn't, lampshade and hit the audience over the head with exactly what was happening. But for these 5 minutes, I really appreciated that moment.
Oh, I'm so glad to hear that. I actually, I made that point as well because it is an interesting comic to film connection. In the comic, we've talked about the Aether and the Reality Stone and all that stuff. But this idea that the Aether or the reality gem has reality warping powers is pretty foundational to the stuff in the comic. And, we see it in the gauntlet that the reality stone can distort time and space and logic. And this is something that you're right. The Aether is just sort of hinting at in some kind of subtle rain-based ways here. And they don't need to spend any time talking about it. And you're right. It's just delightful. Get out of the way and let us see her slap Thor twice.
Yes. Exactly. I would not call this reality warping. I would call it like ever so slightly. If you put a level on reality that was very, very sensitive, you might see a tiny little bent, but still it's something, it's something that we get
reality
to
ding. Yes.
And,
okay.
And then I liked what happens between her and Thor, where she goes over to Thor, and it's that classic kind of rom-com moment of she is both so happy this man is back. And I don't even know if it's that she's actually angry or that she feels she's supposed to be angry because she doesn't want to be the person who just has no self-respect whatsoever. And so she slaps him. Mm-hmm. And then she's sort of surprised at herself. And he goes, "What was that for?" And she says, "Oh, I just wanted to make sure you were real." And then she slaps him again and says, "No, that was because I'm mad at you." Mm-hmm. And we get this actually kind of really nice moment between them where, she says, "You left me, you abandoned me, all this stuff we talked about." And he says, "Well, I'm so sorry. I had to go stop all the prevention on these all the war and devastation on these 9 worlds." And she says, as excuses go, that one's not terrible. But then goes further, I know you were back. I saw you in New York. Which again, I thought was a nice tie-in of, I really like that the MCU is an interconnected universe. And this is obviously fairly early on in the MCU. It's one of the first movies after the big team up. And I think an interesting question was going to be, because it's something most movies till now that are like this haven't really gotten right, is what's the connection? How do you have this major world-altering event take place, and what does other people do with that? And so just a slight reminder, of course, Jane Foster would have seen that on television, and that has an effect when he comes back. And she's like, "But you were in New York. You could have come found me." I really liked that as a it's funny. Now we have that all of the time, and we debate about, is it an Easter egg? Is it too much? Is it too little? For this, though, it was a really nice moment of oh yeah, okay, so they're going to tell Thor's individual story, but they're going to remind us that this is happening in the larger interconnected universe.
Right. And I think you're absolutely right. It has a really nice touch here, and I like all of these movies, the way they talk about the interconnectedness, because they're soft pedaling them. Later, it becomes more glaring when they don't talk about where the superheroes were when giant, terrible things are happening. And that's more notable than, here, where they're just sort of gesturing, visiting the concept. And I think that's really nice too.
Yeah. And then I get into a moment that is either very good or very bad writing, and I can't quite tell which, and I'm going to give it the credit for being very good writing, where I think that they not only go into the rom-com idea, but they kind of poke fun at it. And I don't have the exact words in front of me, so correct me if you do. But basically, he is making some big declaration, and often in a rom-com, one of the two will stumble, and the other will say, "I get it." And they both just sort of look at each other and understand that they totally understand this thing that neither of them could put into words. And they kiss, and it's all romantic. Mm-hmm. And it's a very sweet idea. But as someone who's been in a number of relationships myself and been a relationship counselor to many others, a lot of times when someone says, "Do you just get it?" and the other person says, "Yes, I do," turns out they don't get it because they have different assumptions.
Most of the time, they probably don't get it.
And here it's that Thor says "Yes," and I feel this. And she says, "I feel it too." And he goes, "You feel what?" And she goes, "What?" And they're almost about to kiss, but they're kind of confused. And that's when Darcy shows up. And I loved that moment as actually rom-coms are kind of silly in that regard. And we love them, and I love them too. But yeah, it was a nice, if they did it intentionally, it was a nice poking fun at a rom-com moment.
I'm gonna go full on into intentional, and the fact that it worked for you means it was good writing. I'm just gonna say that. I think it made you feel the right way, and it made me feel the right way. I am a big fan of those kinds of stumbling, clumsy, romantic moments. I'm a softie, and I can really get behind those. And I love, of course, the entree that we get for Darcy here. Look at you, all muscly. Those are, she's just perfect. The interruption is great. And that does give us, again, another transition to Aether action. You know, as they're split up, and Darcy tells them we're going to be arrested, and now you have to go fix this.
And let me just say one other moment about what Darcy does there, because again, it's a way of subverting what I think is one of the worst tropes, which is that I really hate how often rom-coms come down to competition. And generally there's a lot of sexism, and that men compete in one very specific way and women compete in another very specific way. And so often when like the best friend acknowledges the attractiveness of the love interest for our main character, it's portrayed as kind of like there's cattiness there, or like she's not a good friend or something like this. To me, it is very clear that Darcy finds Thor to be a wonderful specimen of attractive, virile masculinity, and is not the slightest bit interested in competing with Jane for his affection.
Right.
You know, the way she does it isn't flirtatious. It isn't like, ooh, look at you. It's like, wow, look at this wonderful statue. I want to poke at it. You know, look at this wonderful piece of art. And, you know, the way she does it is completely inappropriate, and also kind of funny of how, you know, traditionally male characters act towards a very, you know, attractive female. And so that's a fun flip. But it just, the way that it's done with none of the she's jealous of Jane nonsense, I just really appreciated that.
And I think Kat Dennings as a performer is incredibly disarming when it comes to this kind of stuff. So she gets away with this material that might otherwise, you know, come off as wildly, obviously inappropriate. It takes a minute, because she's so charming, to realize that people probably shouldn't behave this way, and their circumstances are so crazy, Thor is that his existence is so crazy that it's kind of made okay. I also really appreciate the way Thor responds to just being quite regularly objectified in this way as sort of a charming non-issue, and that's also disarming. Yeah,
I agree with both of those.
Yeah. So we go back. We have the Asgard response. The Asgard response team on Jane's elbow, as the officer attempts to arrest her. And
so you mean the American response team? Not the American, the police response team, not Asgardian.
Well, you're right. The Aether is not as specifically Asgardian. That's why I was making the Aether this Asgardian response on Jane. But really, it's the Aether responded when they tried to arrest her. The police tried to arrest her and threw them back, and then action happens.
Right.
We get, I think, the first opportunity for, well, let's start with, what do you think of this being the way the Aether responds?
So this is a thing where I am left somewhat unsure and wish that I had known more about it. And it's not that I wanted more direct exposition, though I wouldn't have minded that. At least is better than nothing, because it's interesting how you interpret that scene as though the Aether has some consciousness, like it is aware of that the physical vessel that it's in is going to become endangered and responds defensively. I didn't take it as that. I took it as more that she is possessed of this substance that's in essence, you know, one of these, Infinity Stones, and that, as we've established with others, when human mortals touch them, or touch the essence of them, or touch the things they are, that there's kind of an explosive energetic reaction. And so I only took it as any human touching her is going to have this reaction, but Thor doesn't. And it's kind of a reminder that Thor is, as an Asgardian, like more attuned to the nature of the Reality Stone. And now as I'm thinking that, because I don't remember Darcy physically touching her, but of course if she did, and I may well have missed it, that would undercut my whole theory.
I think she might have, because I thought of that, especially when she first runs across real-time research. She does. They do touch.
Okay.
They
So
do
in that
touch.
case, yeah.
Yeah.
It does seem like maybe it has some sentience of its own. I would have liked that to be spelled out a little bit more. Because
What's interesting
I
is the setup. It's kind of it's almost a Venom type symbiote setup, right? That's what I kept thinking about. Like, this was the Aether energy was a partnership with her, and her, what we find out in the next 5 minutes is her system is not going to be able to take the level of energy that the Aether has imbued her with, but that it was some sort of symbiotic relationship.
Yeah, and I think part of my further confusion comes because we do get a scene of the dark elves hanging around on their particular part of the universe, which I will pronounce correctly. We've discussed it before. Svartalfheim. Svartalfheim. Though you would not think that immediately, just seeing this weird collection of letters on the screen.
Right.
Like, I don't know if they just have a connection to the Aether or if the Aether has a connection to them. Like, clearly the Aether was awakened and they awakened.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if the Aether is kind of like, the One Ring, in that it wants to get back to Sauron. Does the Aether want to get back to the Dark Elves? Is the Aether completely amoral, like uncaring? It just wants to be alive in something instead of hidden in a rock somewhere in London. These are all things that I think would be really interesting. Without them, I'm feeling kind of lost at this point.
How badly? I mean, I hear you feeling lost, but I'm wondering how important that is from the filmmaking perspective. Like, we see how it behaves, we see it's hurting her. Are you looking for more sort of comic lore to support the behavior of this thing, or is that where they left you feeling empty?
I mean, I think the lack of plot or character development, or with the exception of a few things in the scene, acting or dialogue, were all the things that were leaving me empty. So it's like, nothing to this point has seemed remotely interesting. In that, like I'm able to find like the moments that are fun, like the cool rain moment, the romance. But so far, we're 25 minutes into the movie, and I don't know anything about who to care about or why. And so I do think that, like, if you're going to give me these scenes of the Aether doing these things, I'd like to have some more context for it. And again, if it is all building to something, we're discussing it minute by minute. And something what happens there is that we forget that, like, we're actually going to learn the answers to these questions in 20 minutes, which is actually in 1 month, And so that's a weird, like, dichotomy of it. I think the lack of it is a little bit glaring, especially under this minute by minute format. Spoilers, we don't really get those answers by the end of the movie. And so I think it's also like the fact that it is, I don't think it had to have been answered now, but the fact that I know that it's not going to be answered later in the movie makes the fact that this would have been a good time to, answer that. All you had to say was have Malekith, say some line about, like, the Aether wants to come back to us, or, the Aether may want to be free, but we know that we are its true master, one way or the other, like, name something. I think that could have helped a lot.
Yeah, I think where we're left is that there is an interesting ambiguity in the behavior of the Aether. It doesn't, it doesn't necessarily get portrayed as having a mind of its own or a purpose, but it's sort of semi-sentient. Like, it chooses Jane. Does it choose Jane intentionally, or because Jane was there?
Right.
Did it bypass others to choose Jane?
Right.
It protects itself. Is it protecting itself because of this partnership with Jane, this symbiotic relationship, or just because it feels threatened by the cop, whether that was Jane or not? It responds to Malekith, as we've said many weeks in a row. It implies a link to the Dark Elves, but that is never really explained.
Right.
And I think that is the most, to your final point, that is the most frustrating thing, that it's completely retconned out of interest of the MCU.
Right. And I think that it becomes even more glaring, and this is kind of the flip side of what we were saying before about the nice connectivity. It's great to have that connectivity, but as I think a number of directors have said was sometimes frustrating, or writers, it does mean you're in much more of a box, because the writers here and the director may want to tell their own story of the Aether being what they want it to be. But to some extent, we also know that it's one of the Infinity Stones. And we've seen the workings of both the Mind Stone in Loki's staff and the Tesseract. That was the heart of both the Captain America and the Avengers movie itself.
Right.
None of those act in self-defense. None of those seem to have a desire to either be worked by Nick Fury or Red Mask or any of these groups. And frankly, if you tell me that there's one particular stone that has a little more sentience than the other, the reality one's probably lower on my list, of which I think would make the most sense for that. That seems like the Mind Stone would be the one to have some of that, or the Soul Stone. So I think it's just all ways in which it just doesn't, it just feels sloppy, if that makes sense. It doesn't feel like someone really sat down and storyboarded this and figured out, okay, what are people going to think now about the Reality Stone, and what do we want them to think, and how does that match with what else they'll think, and et cetera.
Yeah, I think it goes back to our point last week that the brand guide wasn't finished for this one, and this is yet just another data point in our case that the brand guide wasn't finished, and they didn't know what this thing was going to be. In short, I think we can say pretty definitively that it doesn't appear to make sort of sentient moral choices, right? It doesn't have agency. It just responds, right? It doesn't intend harm. Sometimes it just is harm. And that's about the extent of its level of wisdom.
Right.
All right. We do have, I think that this is the first human that goes through the Bifrost.
To my knowledge, yes. There may have been one far back in history, but we've never heard of them. And certainly it's Jane's first time.
Jane's first time. She feels like she's on the party bus. She has a good old time with the trip to Asgard. Thing about the Bifrost, what do you know about the patterns that are left in the parking lot?
So in the first Thor movie, we established that often this kind of like collection of Norse runes was left. Often it was this kind of like a 3-circle symbol that is often associated with Norse mythology or with heathenry, the modern religious practice based on Norse mythology, that I should know the name of and I forget the name of. But then we haven't seen that since then. By the Avengers movie, clearly Thor was traveling by the Bifrost again or something similar. We never really explained how it was rebuilt after it was destroyed at the end of Thor 1. But I don't think we ever saw the runes in that one. And so here again, I'm not sure what response that seems to have. Yeah.
Yeah. It feels like it's less intentional, more decorative this time. I don't know. I don't have a background in the runic sort of symbolic studies, but this just feels like more braided lines that sort of run together, and we don't get a heavy intention. What's interesting is it cuts off the front end of a car. So what is it about Asgardians or humans touching Asgardians that prevent them to being burned into ash when the Bifrost hits them the way the pavement is?
I got nothing. I got literal nothing.
That's fair. That's fair. It comes back to our discussion of like science magic and Asgardian magics.
Questions like that come up when a movie or a TV show has worked really hard to say, if you accept these basic precepts, that light speed exists or that other dimensional life exists or whatever, we are going to be logically consistent within the barriers of those precepts. And thus you can logically infer additional things that we don't actually spell out. This movie is unburdened by logic. It is unburdened by an attempt to have consistency in terms of the physics of any of this. And so there's a part of me that's kind of almost confused why we would ask that, because it feels like everything so far has worked the way the writers and directors want it to work, with no thought about what does that mean about anything else.
Yeah. It's a fantastically frivolous comic book movie, and that's fine. I do think that it all goes back to Iron Man and how well this movie, the franchise, has earned its wizards. Has it
Mm-hmm.
earned its Bifrost? And to my eye, it's fine. It really is. And I just like the idea that there is this Bifrost energy that will cut cars in half, and they're spending an awful lot of time, you know, looking for so many other artifacts of magic when they travel by a giant, effectively giant blue beam of destruction.
You know, the question has been asked many times if closing a sling ring portal, what Doctor Strange and others can do,
Yeah.
literally cuts through flesh and bone and metal. Why don't they just use that to cut off? Just put Thanos' hand with the gauntlet in it into another realm and cut it off.
Exactly the same.
Yeah, I avoided rolling my eyes when you said that this had earned that. I would say that I politely disagree. I think it's more that I wish it gave me enough to want to care, to want to believe that there is some consistency or some logic in a way that I do think a lot of the others do. I think Tony Stark's movies, it's almost like the reason it doesn't bother me is because I'm holding this to such a low standard. Because it hasn't given me any reason to expect anything better.
I feel like that's a thing that I had to do with Thor 1, like introducing a god into this universe that I've really found myself with such affinity to, grounded in the earned wizards. This one was the big stretch at the time. And I think this movie pushes those boundaries even further, right? The things that we're asked to understand. And we cut to it after they go see Heimdall. Hi, Heimdall. Welcome to Asgard. Everything's really cool. Jane's all doe-eyed. Then we go back to Vampire Malekith, who is fisting the soil, and he's very angry. And I'm reminded how weird a choice he is as a villain.
See, here's the thing. Because when you compare it to Thor 1, and again, I came to like Thor 1 an awful lot more than I did before we did this process. And I think there is a lot of really good things in Thor 1. Mostly that Kenneth Branagh is a Shakespearean director and writer, and he brings out a Shakespearean nature to those movies and finds the Shakespearean drama and focuses on that.
Yeah.
And when I watched the Scottish play, apparently we got some angry emails that I said Macbeth in a different podcast, but now I've just done it again. So just don't listen to us in theaters, people. It's a bad idea. Don't listen to us backstage. No one, I think, has ever, or probably most people, don't go to that and sit back and wonder, okay, what are the physics of the cauldron that the witches are using to make these predictions that they do? Because that's not the kind of thing it is. You're not supposed to care about the physics of the magic. You're supposed to care about the prophecy and what does that mean, and that Macduff is not of woman born in the traditional way. And the first movie managed to do that. And so I never cared about the fact, well, I probably did. If you go back and listen, I probably had a lot of rantings about how dumb it was. But I was able to get swept up enough in the Shakespeare of it all that I just didn't care very much.
Yeah.
And I feel like this isn't giving me the Shakespeare of it all. And so, yeah, I am left wondering, why does the reality stone function differently than the Mind Stone or the Tesseract, which I think is the Energy Stone or anything like that? Like, there's just no... Alan Taylor is not Kenneth Branagh, and that is perhaps not his fault. And maybe he's good at directing children's movies. I have no idea. But it felt like putting him into this role, for which he is, as far as I can tell, wildly underqualified. It just really shrinks through, because without that Shakespearean, like, dragging you, kicking and screaming away from commenting on all the things that are so bad about Thor 1, that you're like, okay, but Loki and Thor and Odin is so good. This isn't giving us any of that. So all we're left is why did the Bifrost cut up cars?
Well, and I'll give you so many of those points. I don't think dragging Alan Taylor is quite fair, because he does have credibility. He was chosen for a reason. He has a real sensibility for high fantasy, and it doesn't necessarily align with Thor, perhaps, in this movie. But I think he's fine, and I do think that I want to get back to Malekith, because, again, it's a reminder. We just have to remember that the comic connection to Malekith is that he is now brooding and humorless, right? This is very different from what Malekith was in the comic in his crazy outfit. He was essentially dark Loki, right? He was a flamboyant trickster, and this movie made him a sullen space vampire. And I just have to keep saying that because there is room for an Alan Cumming portrayed Malekith that would have been outstanding.
Mm-hmm. Christopher Eccleston is one of my favorite actors, and he's just so criminally underused in this.
Yeah.
And I feel like his voice in particular, he's so good at using his voice to portray a range of emotions, and Doctor Who, he's the 9th Doctor, I believe, the 8th Doctor. He's season 1 of the new kind of BBC Wales reboot. And just the degree to which his voice can convey a man who is showing you one emotion while clearly feeling another that he doesn't even want to admit to himself is so good. And there's just none of that in this.
Yeah, they buried him in the, in the outfit, in the makeup, and that was too bad. In this scene, he is talking to Algrim and essentially pledging his efforts to make the Asgardians suffer.
Right.
Fine. That's a tale as old as time.
Which I did think was a nice touch. And by the way, I do want to just say I looked back on Mr. Alex Taylor's directing filmography, and the only other movie I recognize is Terminator Genesis. So your claim that he is a good director is so far not ringing true. He has directed a number of episodes of good TV shows, so I'll give him some credit for that. But
he has directed a bunch of Interview with a Vampire, of House of the Dragon, of Blue-Eyed Samurai, which is a fantastic anime. His efforts on TV have been are really what got him this gig, right? He was a director and co-executive producer on Game of Thrones, the original. He's in the space. And okay. I want to give him credit for that. Terminator Genesis also had similar problems.
I will assume that his favorite sports team was losing the season when this movie was made. He was distracted. It's not his best. Fair enough. But I will say I really liked one aspect of that scene with Malekith and his buddy, because what's his buddy's name? Avrir? Algrim says that Malekith's legacy will be the survival of the Dark Elves. And Malekith immediately responds with that he will bring vengeance to the Asgardians, which I do think is a really nice way of sort of showing that, like, Malekith is not, Algrim kind of wants Malekith to be one thing, and that's what Malekith is not being, because as I think a number of other movies have shown really well in TV shows as well as reality, like, you can fight to hurt what you hate or to defend what you love. And Algrim's like, hey, how about you fight to defend us? And Malekith's like, nah, I'd rather fight to punish the people who hurt us. Right. And as we're going to find out, he's already been willing, and he's going to be willing again to not work for the survival of his people in order to bring out this vengeance idea he has. So it's kind of a nice way of showing, like, as opposed to Thor, who's become the leader that the Asgardians need and that Odin wanted him to be, Al Gore wants him to be this heroic saving figure, and that's not on Malekith's dance card.
Well, and that's another area that I think the movie does short shrift to our villains, because the comic arc, Algrim, the Algrim curse comic arc comes from the same place, right, in the original material, and Algrim is ultimately betrayed by Malekith and becomes the powerful curse, which is an agent in the MCU, becomes an agent of Malekith's vengeance, and in the comic eventually turns on Malekith. And it's one of those things that I think could be foreshadowed in this movie, but because of the way the Dark Elves are handled in the MCU, and I'll say that by saying not, it's a thing, it's an opportunity lost in the handling of these characters. I think Curse Algrim is such an interesting and complex sort of Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde character, and any opportunity to deal with the duality of identity is a fantastic opportunity in my book, and we lose that here. It just becomes a blunt instrument.
Right.
And so this pledge of vengeance, I think you're right. It's a nice scene, and it is ultimately, we'll see to the degree which it is, which they're able to make good on that elegance of the moment.
Yeah. And I will say, having recently sort of, it may have sounded like I was praising the first movie. The first movie is pretty bad, too, to be clear. It's just miles and miles better than this one because, as I said, of the Shakespearean aspect. The Frost Giants were also not very well treated in terms of, like, giving us enough to care about.
Right.
Although Loki had a connection to them. In some ways, I feel like if this movie had been about the Frost Giants, or if the Dark Elves had been seated in that first movie, or if Loki had used the Dark Elves to invade in Avengers, like, let's use this connectivity. If you'd given us some reason to care about, now that Loki is much more kind of like relegated to the background, of course he's not going to stay there. I think it would have given us a lot more reason to care about them. But the fact that they were this completely new race that is given all exposition, but none of it really makes sense. All of it seems so extreme. Again, like he talks about how the world has been corrupted by light. How do you grow carrots without what does that mean? Just not much there.
Back in, it's a very brief scene that we have with our dark elf friends, and so we go back to Asgard, and we're introduced to some Asgardian healthcare. Seems like there were no lines; they were able to get right in. I think they have their healthcare system on lock.
She is not asked for her insurance card.
No.
She's not asked to fill out a clipboard, so she doesn't have to sign into Epic. So clearly, a better system all around.
Yes. Now, do you know of this Soul Forge? Is that a thing that was new to you?
I don't even think I heard the word Soul Forge in these 5 minutes.
Oh, well, you didn't.
Okay.
It comes later, but that's the device, and so I won't spend too much time on it. But the point to make here, as this wonderful device starts doing its work, we have the sort of particulate light matter that are like coming together in strings and eventually will represent Jane's physiology that the nurses are working on. She is a curious, childlike wonder. I love that. And this is a great opportunity to just think about how Jack Kirby and influenced the science of magic and the magic of science, and blending these two things together. Like it's just there is yet again the don't think about it attitude that comes with our cosmic reality in the MCU, and that's fine. The gods will casually use their sci-fi devices, but this is one of those things that's a celebration of Kirby's creative ideology.
And I will say that here again, like I think a lot of the best parts of this story, Kirby is creating wonderful things, but he's not doing so out of whole cloth. The term Soul Forge itself does not really exist as a translation in Norse mythology, but there is certainly the idea that the soul is made up of many parts, and that the forging of the soul and then the forging of the soul with the body and with the mind and all that are things that exist in Norse mythology. And we'll talk about that in more detail when we go into this, probably next week or the week after. But certainly, I think Kirby does an interesting job here of taking those mythological elements and turning them into something that I guess made sense in the comic and that we're seeing here now.
Sure. And that's what I got. That's where we are. This is a real utility set of minutes, and it just moves us to the next space. When we come back, we will be firmly in Asgard for a little bit at least.
Not the worst that we've had. I think there were some pretty fun little moments in here that I actually found myself enjoying just a little bit.
I like it. I'll take the win.
There we go.
I feel like I should put a notch on my DVD case or something.
I think if you watch this movie, maybe by the end of this season, someone will have constructed a podcast. Someone will have constructed a drinking game of take a drink every time Matthew enjoyed something in this movie. And I guarantee that you will get tipsy, but probably not push too far over beyond that. It is a safe drinking game.
I think you'll be able to drive home. Yeah. I don't think you're going to have to worry about it.
Yeah. We are not encouraged. No one sue us because they have too many drinks. Do not drink and drive. Do not watch the MCU and drink.
Please don't.
Don't do any of those things. Be good, love Christ, worship Allah, yay Buddha, hail Zoroaster. I've just offended so many. Zoroastrianism, isn't that what it's about? I don't know.
Zoroastrianism, that's good. Yeah.
Zoroaster.
Just out of the blue.
L'chaim and happy Yom Kippur, whatever Pesach this is, but I'm just gonna shut up because I am. Yeah, I've just offended everybody, and we're gonna move on and
Look,
let's talk about Thor.
Until next time, true believers. I'm Pete Wright. That there is Matthew Fox, and we'll be back for minutes 31 through 35.
Maybe, unless I get a better offer.